Well, Russia's invasion of Ukraine in its second month, scores of civilians dead, entire cities flattened, and perhaps most troubling, no end in sight, at least not yet. I'm Becky Anderson. Hello and welcome back to Connect the World. It's been another day of intense Russian airstrikes on Ukraine. This is video of smoke rising around the capital, Kyiv, where our CNN crew has been hearing explosions throughout the day. We'll get a live report from Kyiv in just a moment for you. The mayor of Irpin, a suburb of Kyiv, telling CNN Ukrainian forces have retaken that city. CNN cannot independently verify that claim. An advisor to Ukraine's president reporting attacks on cities in the northeast and in the northwest of the country, and claiming Mariupol now faces carpet bombing. A new video from there shows residents returning to their destroyed homes. Ukraine's president describing what has happened to Mariupol as a humanitarian catastrophe. The mayor today saying his city is, quote, in the hands of the occupiers. France's foreign minister comparing conditions there to what happened during Syria's war. Have a listen.
You can see Mariupol as a second Aleppo, and there will be collective guilt if we don't do anything. Mariupol is siege warfare.
You see Mariupol as a second Aleppo, he said. And with Russia's drive to capture the capital stalled, the head of Ukraine's military intelligence speculating, at least, that Russian President Vladimir Putin could now be looking to carve the country in two, like North and South Korea. Well, as Ukrainian troops fight to hold the line around the capital, local officials there say kids are going to go back to school, though it will be online, not in person. The city also loosening its curfew a bit. CNN's Fred Pleitkin has the view from the capital of Kyiv for you.
Hi, Becky. Yeah, there's a lot going on in the Ukrainian capital, and it's really been happening throughout the entire night, the morning, and then into the afternoon hours as well, as we've heard very heavy shelling, a lot heavier than we did throughout the course of the entire weekend. Also, air raid sirens going off frequently, and just those thuds that you hear constantly here in the Ukrainian capital. And there's plumes of smoke, especially over the northwestern districts of the city. Of course, there you have that district that we keep talking about called Irpin, where a lot of the fighting seems to be concentrated. The Ukrainians in the past have said that they control about 80% of that area after pushing Russian forces out, but that they are still being shelled there. And, you know, from what we've seen, there really are a lot of smoke plumes over that area, and some pretty big noises coming from there as well. The spokesman for the Ukrainian army is saying, you know, that the Russians seem to have launched somewhat of a small counteroffensive, trying to take some towns, some smaller villages, and some streets. But so far, he says that the Ukrainian military is holding them up. The deputy defense minister said that she believes that the Russians are trying to create corridors around the city, which seems to mean they're still trying to encircle the Ukrainian capital, obviously so far not having very much success at that. And then you have the Ukrainian president who came out and said that apparently dress or ceremonial uniforms were found with the Russians, seeming to indicate that they were preparing for some sort of victory parade here in Kiev. Obviously, that's not something that's going to happen anytime soon. So far, the defenses of the city holding up, and the Ukrainians saying they are on a counteroffensive, Becky.
Well, that's Fred's reporting from the capital. I want to get you a view of the damage just south of where Fred is. ITV's Rohit Katru reports from a town that has been obliterated by Russian strikes.
Shevchenko survived, but not much else did. A statue of the Ukrainian poet still stands after almost everything else was wiped out by a Russian airstrike. The library was hit. Residents take the books they might have once borrowed. The town hall was destroyed too, and the shop for kids, and the pharmacy, and even the off-license. Bishiv is a village 1 hour from Kyiv, and it tells two stories. The crater reveals the force of Russian might, but there's a story of failure too. More than a month into this war, life of sorts carries on. The Russian troops never arrived. although plans were laid to stop them getting in. It looks like an earthquake hit. There is complete destruction absolutely everywhere. But maybe the most interesting thing to see is not the fact this place was flattened, but the fact it wasn't flattened into submission. In the capital, monuments are being protected as history is rewritten. Because, met with a fierce resistance, Moscow now says it no longer wants to focus on the capital. But the Ukrainians don't believe that.
We cannot trust them. At the moment, we don't see any withdrawal of Russian troops from certain areas of Kyiv.
Because you needn't go far from Kyiv to see the area around it was in Russia's sights until not long ago. And the strategists protecting the capital believe nothing has changed. Rohit Kachru, ITV News, Bishiv.
Well, the capital, Kyiv itself, easing its curfew. However, the city of Zaporizhia in the southwest part of Ukraine effectively under lockdown. CNN's Ivan Watson got access to that city to see how police are enforcing what is a daytime curfew.
This is a checkpoint at the entrance to the eastern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia. But this is an unusual day. The government has imposed a citywide daytime curfew. Traffic is not being allowed in or out. And we're getting a look with the local police force at how they're enforcing this emergency curfew. I'm getting a tour of the city with two local police inspectors. We have passed many deployed Ukrainian soldiers. We cannot show them or film them for their safety, given that there is a full-fledged war taking place in this country. What is striking about this daytime curfew is that a city of nearly 1 million inhabitants is now a complete ghost town.
My name is Roman, Panchenko Roman. I'm Ukrainian. I serve in police for already 6 years. I like my work. I'm proud of my work. In the territory of the city, only policemen and some military men. Every car which goes to the city is checked.
The police say it's easier to maintain security and search for suspected Russian collaborators when the city is locked down. How far away is the Russian army right now from where we are?
Russian army is several fronts, but the nearest place where Russian tanks are dislocated is maybe 30 kilometers from this place.
A half hour by car.
Yes, you're right.
Would you defend Zaporizhia if the Russian army comes here? I mean, you're not soldiers, you're police. Would you fight?
I'm a man. I am a Ukrainian man. As for me, it's very ashamed for a man not to protect his family, not to protect his house, not to protect his life.
The people here know what happened to other Ukrainian cities and towns that have been attacked by the Russian military. They don't want that to happen here, but they say if it does, they're ready.
Ivan Watson reporting for you. Right. Away from Ukraine, European Union interior ministers have been arriving in Brussels. They are set to discuss EU coordination of what is this steady stream of refugees leaving Ukraine. And as you will be well aware, we are talking about millions. According to the UN, more than 3.8 million people have now fled the country since this war started February the 24th. When you add to that the number of internally displaced people, an estimated 10 million have now been forced from their homes, a quarter of Ukraine's population. Well, lives are at stake. That's the bottom line, as Ukraine's leaders gear up for another round of talks with Moscow. Those are happening on Tuesday in Istanbul. Ukrainian President Zelensky has said Ukraine is ready to accept neutral, non-nuclear status. He has also said that he is prepared to talk to President Putin himself. That invitation for talks, though, from Putin is not forthcoming at this point. When will this devastating war on Ukraine end, and how? Our international diplomatic editor, Nick Robertson, is there in Brussels for you. On the ground, Russians say that they no longer want to focus on the capital, although the evidence is that they are still intent on an assault there. But they intend to focus fully on the east of the country. Now, we've got, effectively, we understand what the Ukrainian position is at this point. What does that focus on the east suggest about how President Putin's negotiators might position themselves at these upcoming talks in Turkey on Tuesday?
The two sides are still far apart, Becky. If we take at face value what the Russians are saying is, at the very least, they're intending to keep forces on the ground in Ukraine. Intelligence officials in Ukraine, Ukrainian intelligence officials, believe that Russia's sort of trying to separate, at the very least, the north from the south of the country. In the areas that Russia's taken control of in the south, they're putting in parallel governments with their own set of officials. According to Ukrainians, the Russians will only allow people to use Russian currency. So the Ukrainians feel that Russia's already trying to create a separate state there. So that's how the Ukrainians view the Russian position. The Russian position, as you say, they are articulating as they're focusing on the east. It's understood they've wanted and they're trying to get this land corridor to link Crimea in the south to Russia in the east. The Ukrainian position is, as you said, President Zelensky says, look, we will consider a non-nuclear neutral position. However, he wants security guarantees and is certainly looking at NATO and European nations for that. And he says to put that in place, it would require a referendum of the Ukrainian people. And for a referendum, it would require that they are free to vote in any way. And for that, it would require that all Russian forces pull out of Ukraine back to their positions on the 24th of February, which is the Russians would have to have a full retreat from Ukraine. So you can see these two positions, there's just not a middle ground between them at the moment. Now, of course, that's what negotiators try to work out. But it's such a massive middle ground. You have to look at this situation. And given what we've also heard from the Deputy Defense Minister in Kyiv today, saying that they still believe that Russia's trying to encircle the capital, despite what officials in Moscow are saying, that there is not a negotiated position or solution on the table at the moment. So these talks in Istanbul might help the humanitarian situation. President Macron in France has been trying to help get 150,000 people evacuated from Mariupol, one of the worst hit cities. That's, I think, where things are. It's a very, very long way from finding a negotiated peaceful solution at the moment, Becky.
Sure. I was with the French Foreign Minister in Doha this weekend at the Doha Forum. He described Mariupol as Europe's Aleppo, quite frankly. It's remarkable what's going on. Lest we forget, people are losing their lives on a daily basis in Ukraine at the moment. I have to ask you, how did President Putin's remarks about the Russian leader needing to go, President Putin needing to go, in his speech in Warsaw at the weekend, go down in the corridors of the buildings behind where you are, in the corridors of power in Europe? I know the White House has walked that back. They've said Joe Biden wasn't trying, and if I said President Putin, I meant Joe Biden, wasn't talking about regime change. But how did, this is being discussed as at least a gaffe by some and more by others.
Of course, there is a sense of concern that everything that President Biden has built in terms of unity, transatlantic alliance at NATO with European Union allies and partners is hugely important to maintain that unified position against Russia in terms of sanctions, in terms of military support, in terms of humanitarian support and helping refugees. So the unity is important. And the language that leaders use is important to keep that unity, that they're all aligned. And we heard President Macron over the weekend say, look, that's not the sort of language I would use. He said, essentially, we shouldn't be using language that potentially escalates the war or escalates tensions. And he made this point. He made the point that he said, look, I am still talking to President Putin. So that kind of language for me is not useful. He's talking to President Putin perhaps more than any other European leader, and he's talking to President Zelensky, and it's all about trying to, bring a peaceful solution, humanitarian corridors, if nothing else. But look at the two positions between the Elysee Palace, President Macron, and the White House, President Biden. The White House said at the outset, before the war began, that they would use diplomacy until the last moment when Russia invaded, and that would be it. President Macron at the moment says, I will use diplomacy to the last moment, and he means he's still continuing to use it. And as long as there's a conversation to be had with President Putin, he'll have it. So yes, you understand the two positions and the two sensibilities are in a different place. So the unity is important, the language is important, and President Biden's words, he knows, the White House knows, leaders here know, will be used by the Kremlin against them. And I think we've already got a sense of that from the Kremlin, saying they're not talking now about regime change in Kyiv either. They're spinning it back. They're playing it back. The Kremlin will get mileage out of this.
Nick Robertson is our international diplomatic editor. Always good to have you, Nick. Thank you. Well, just ahead on this show, I was in Doha in Qatar this weekend at a big meeting. The Qatari foreign minister was there, and he told me, and I quote here, we have to stick to international law. I've been speaking to him about his efforts to end the war in Ukraine. That interview is next. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been appealing to parliaments around the world, calling for more help to fight the Russian invasion. And this weekend, he did the same at the Doha Forum, which I attended. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that the majority of the conversations there revolved around Russia's war on Ukraine. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, was there. He had some strong words when he compared Ukraine's Mariupol to Syria's Aleppo. And that's a comparison we are hearing a lot lately. Well, in response, Qatar's foreign minister says the response that we've seen from the international community is unprecedented, but reminding the audience that these atrocities have been happening in places in this region of the Middle East for decades. Well, I interviewed the foreign minister at the forum, and I started by asking him to be quite clear about what Qatar's stance is on this war. Take a listen.
Qatar's stand has been very, very clear. We are against any act of aggression or any threatening of use of power or the use of power against the sovereign country or trying to undermine the territorial integrity of any country. And we made this very clear. We have to stick to the international and to the UN Charter, and this needs to be respected because otherwise the world will be in a chaos. So we keep our communication channel with all the parties. I was in Moscow approximately 10 days ago. I had the chance to have a conversation with the foreign minister of Russia, talking about the Ukrainian issue, but also keeping the communication ongoing with our Ukrainian counterparts, trying to help or offering our help or contribution to de-escalate the situation and put an end for this war.
Is it your sense that President Putin wants peace at this point?
Well, I cannot really say what President Putin is thinking about, but what I believe, and from my conversation with my counterpart there in Russia, that they are willing to engage on the demands that they have put forward. Now, how far the Ukrainian government are willing to give on those demands, this is really the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian people's decision. But our interest now is and the priority is really to create some safe environment for the people, for the civilians over there. There is a deterioration in the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, which is unprecedented. So I think that should be the priority. We should focus on having a ceasefire, humanitarian corridors, bringing the humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, and instead of having this conflict and disagreement in a battlefield to be around the table.
The West has imposed swingeing sanctions on Russia in an effort to squeeze the Kremlin at this point. The Qatar Investment Authority, or the QIE, has a sizable investment in the Russian oil giant Rosneft. Is Qatar prepared to withdraw from Russia? Do you unwind that position?
Well, actually, right now with the current situation, we are not thinking about any new investments there. Even, by the way, in Europe, until we have some clarity on the stability of the situation. But our decisions that we have took in the investment at that time was based on a commercial assessment, and these investments are still ongoing.
So you'll make no new investments
right now
in
in the current environment? I think that the investment is really under a lot of review.
The Norwegian Sovereign Fund has unwound its position in Russian companies. You're saying that Qatar investment in Russia is under review at this point?
For the current time, our investment decisions, as I told you, is based on commercial assessment. And what we have currently in Russia, we are not thinking about increasing that these days until we see a better atmosphere and more political stability.
You often play mediator. You have done throughout the Iran nuclear deal. Do you see yourselves continuing to mediate or play a mediation role? And if so, can you just explain what that is with regard Russia, Ukraine?
Our world is interconnected. So whenever we see that we can offer our help and support for any efforts, we will not hesitate to make our offers. And this offer is extended to the Russians and to the Ukrainians in order to find a common ground and to put an end for this humanitarian catastrophe. And we will never give up on our efforts. It has been successful in several places. It didn't work well maybe in other places, but we have to continue to pursue that way. If no countries will adopt this view of shared responsibility and share the future of the world, then the world will be in a very difficult situation.
I want to talk about the Iran deal. You've played what seems to be a significant mediation role. Could I describe it as that with regard Iran?
Well, Iran is our neighbor, and anything that happens or evolve over there, it definitely will affect us as Qatar, but will affect also the GCC countries. US is our ally, and we want to see an end for this JCPOA negotiation by bringing all the parties back to the JCPOA commitment, because this is something we see is very important for the region and for the stability of the region, and we don't want to see an arms race happening here. So we believe that the best way forward for them to get the parties back to the agreement. We are trying our best to use our contacts with Iran and with the US in order to bridge the gap between them and to reach an understanding. We are trying to help and to support the process. We are not effectively or officially a mediator, but we are trying to use our contacts with both countries in order to bring them closer.
The sticking points, it seems, are the lifting of economic sanctions at this point and the delisting of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards as a terror organization by the US State Department. Do you believe that that would be a smart move by the US?
Well, let us just distinguish between two things. The listing and delisting of terrorist organization will be based on the US assessment because it's a US listing. It's not the UN listing, which everyone is acknowledging and supporting. Regarding the economic sanctions, we as a small country, we never believe that economic sanctions or unilateral sanctions are an effective tool to change policies. And this has been very clear and principled position for us. So economic sanctions normally affecting the people, and punishing the people for policies of government, we don't see it as the right approach. So we believe that economic sanctions need to be lifted and the country needs a relief because of the people, and this is the livelihood of the Iranian people. It's not punishing a government and so on.
Do you see the Revolutionary Guards as a terror organization, a malign influence in this region? Would the delisting of that organization by the states, which is clearly a sticking point for the Iranians, be a good move or a bad move for regional stability?
Well, the IRGC is part of the Iranian government or Iranian official military structure. We should respect their structure. We should really talk about the actions that have been taken by certain forces here and there, and those actions, if they are like in the bad interest of the region or specific countries or targeting civilians or in any way, those actions need to be terrorized, but not just terrorizing an organization because of specific action by a smaller group of that.
President Raisi was here in Doha recently. Is it your sense that with or without a deal, Iran is looking for better relations in the region?
Well, this is what we are hearing all the time from the Iranian official. President Raisi, when he was here, he expressed his willingness to engage with the region and to have a better relation with the region, which is something we are very much welcoming here in Qatar. And we believe that a regional dialogue is necessary between the GCC and Iran in order to address the issues and the common concern. I'm sure that a lot of countries in the GCC have their own concerns about Iran, and Iran has some concerns also about some of the regional countries. We need to sit around the table and to understand each other and to build a common ground between the countries.
US officials cancelled planned meetings with the Taliban in Doha this weekend over the decision by the Taliban to not permit girls over the age over grade 6 from actually attending school. Were you disappointed, and does this decision undermine your confidence, any confidence you have in their commitments and assurances?
Well, definitely this decision was very disturbing and disappointing for us, and we have expressed that publicly, and we are going to express that very firmly with them when we are talking with them. We believe engagement will remain very important to ensure that they revisit this decision and they allow the girls back to school. And we will keep the communication ongoing on that front. And we've been very firmly determined that they need to give all Afghans their rights of education, of going to workplace, of practicing their life freely.
Are they listening?
We hope so.
Qatari's foreign minister speaking to me in Doha over the weekend. Extremely important insight. Just ahead, an historic meeting in this part of the world. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken joining allies to tackle issues that just won't wait. We'll take a look at that next. Plus, Iran also on the agenda at that meeting. We are going to look at whether the US will drop its designation of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. That is up next. I want to get you to Antonio Guterres, who, of course, is the Secretary General of the United Nations. He has been talking for a period of time now, and I just want you to get a sense of what's going on here, because he is calling for what is an extremely important humanitarian corridor in Ukraine. Let's listen in.
To assert their right to use nuclear weapons if and when a scenario is required for such a move. We are also seeing reports of nuclear facilities in Ukraine being targeted by strikes. Are you concerned that we are now on the cusp of either a biological conflict here or a nuclear war?
Well, I was this morning in contact with the Director General of International Agency of International Atomic Energy Agency. And there will be a number of very important initiatives by IAEA in the next few days in order to guarantee the security of the nuclear facilities inside Ukraine. And I know that there is a very close contact of Rafael Grossi to both the Russian and the Ukrainian authorities on this, and he has my full support in the initiatives that we'll take in the next few days. On the other hand, I can't imagine the possibility of having a nuclear, a biological, or a chemical war in this scenario. That would be would be something that I believe will be avoided. It must be avoided.
Thank you. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News, Secretary General. Is there any reason you have to believe that a ceasefire is actually being agreed to by the two sides, by Russia in particular? And is there any way the UN can enforce that if a ceasefire comes into play? Thank you.
Well, as a matter of fact, I've been hearing in different positions taken by both the Ukrainians and the Russian Federation in the motion that was presented to the Security Council, reference to a ceasefire. So I think this is the moment in which I believe it makes sense for the UN to assume the initiative. And of course, it depends on the will of the parties when a ceasefire is established to define the arrangements necessary to make the ceasefire persist.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, that is the Secretary General of the United Nations. Really important stuff there. Just reinforcing the importance of a humanitarian ceasefire, a humanitarian corridor for those who are in such need in Ukraine at present. More, of course, as we get it on that, and we hope that the talks that will be going on Tuesday in Turkey will also address that humanitarian corridor. All right. Well, we will work together to confront security challenges, including those from Iran. That's a declaration coming from America's top diplomat. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken expected in the Moroccan capital of Rabat around now. Before that, he was in Israel. That was just a few hours ago, speaking to reporters at the end of, and I cannot underline what I mean when I say, an historic meeting. He stood alongside the foreign ministers in Israel, the foreign ministers of Israel and 4 Arab nations: Morocco, the UAE, where I am based, Bahrain, and Egypt. This meeting again in Israel. They discussed crucial topics, including Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and the Iran nuclear deal. Both topics that, of course, we discussed with the Qatari foreign minister, if you were with us just 5 or 6 minutes ago. Blinken also condemning Sunday's deadly shooting in the Israeli city of Hadera, which is about an hour's drive from Tel Aviv. ISIS has claimed responsibility for that attack that left 2 people dead. Well, the Secretary of State did not leave Israel without having a conversation with the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett on Sunday, who has since tested positive for COVID-19. A lot to unpick here. Let's bring in journalist Elliot Gotkin live in Jerusalem. And I just want to begin with this meeting. I've said it twice. This was an historic summit, the Negev summit, as it's being slugged. Just explain for the benefit of our viewers who may not be as immersed in the politics of this region as you and I are, Elliot, just how significant this getting together of those stakeholders was.
Becky, I think US Secretary of State Antony Blinken summed it up by saying that the once impossible things have become possible. I mean, this would have been impossible just a couple, 2-3 years ago. Imagine talking about these ministers, these foreign ministers, along with the US Secretary of State, getting together at all, let alone getting together in Israel. And it was really quite astonishing to see them all lined up there, one by one, each taking their turn to speak to the journalists there and to really talk about the collaboration and the cooperation that both this Negev summit is about, and of course that the Abraham Accords that kind of paved the way for this summit to take place are about as well. And I mean, look, there weren't any lofty goals, I don't think, that people expected, concrete achievements to come out of this summit. They did agree to kind of make it a permanent forum, so they are going to keep talking at the foreign ministry level, and they've got professional working groups there. I suppose the fact that this meeting took place was perhaps the biggest achievement. After that, it gave the US an opportunity to reconnect with its allies, to show its commitment to the region, to its allies, to the Abraham Accords, and also to assuage any fears and concerns that they may have about the, as it seems likely, the US rejoining the Iran nuclear agreement. And after speaking with one of the officials in the room, I understand they're also talking about ways of how to deter Iran and its proxies from destabilizing the region. So talking about security at a kind of regional level as well. But as you say, Becky, an historic meeting and really quite astonishing scenes to see all of those ministers lined up next to one another.
Yeah, and ISIS claiming responsibility for an attack that happened, at the same time as this meeting was taking place, that left 2 people dead. Regional security, of course, uppermost in the minds of those who were gathered, and condemnation for that attack in Israel from all parties who were present. Thank you. Iran, high on the agenda, both there and as the US Secretary of State continues his regional visit. The issue of delisting the Iranian Revolutionary Guards as a terror organization is front and center. This has become the main sticking point in talks to revive the Iran nuclear deal. For nearly a year, the world has waited for the outcome of these negotiations that could see Iran roll back its nuclear program in return for sanctions relief. But those talks in Vienna were paused on March the 11th amid changing geopolitical dynamics following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Look, Iran still says a deal is close. The EU's top foreign policy official also sounding optimistic over the weekend in Doha, saying a deal could happen in a matter of days. But the US is sounding a more pessimistic tone. Washington's chief nuclear negotiator, Rob Malley, telling me over the weekend that a deal is not around the corner.
And so you could be close for a very long time and you could never get there. So I would say the deal is not just around the corner and it's not inevitable.
All right, the reason has to do with the IRGC, the elite military wing, the Guards, designated a foreign terrorist organization by the Trump administration in 2019 as part of its maximum pressure campaign. Now, Iran demands the organization must be removed from the list. Iran's former foreign minister, Kamal Karachi, told me the same.
IRGC certainly has to be removed from the list. And that's not the only problem. We have around 500 people and institutions sanctioned by the United States. And all of these, or part of these, have direct economic impact on relation between Iran and Western countries.
Let's be quite frank here. The US is obviously considering such a move, but that wouldn't be an end to sanctions on the group.
Regardless of the outcome on the question of the IRGC, which I won't address, I can tell you that the IRGC will remain sanctioned under US law, and our perception, our views, our policy towards the IRGC will not have changed.
The EU coordinator for the talks visited Tehran on Sunday in an effort to close those gaps. What message he carries to Washington could seal the deal in a matter of days or continue this cycle of escalation with Tehran. We will stay on this story for you and bring you all the analysis you need. I'm Becky Anderson with Connect the World. Up next. The biggest story at the Oscars wasn't who won or lost. It was what happened when one movie star heard a joke that went too far. The story of the superstar slap when we come back. Well, it was, of course, one of the biggest awards show on the planet, but overshadowed Sunday night by an altercation between two Hollywood superstars. I'm talking the Oscars here. Comedian Chris Rock was on stage as a presenter, and he cracked a joke about Will Smith's wife, Jada, and her hair loss. Well, Smith got up from his seat, walked up on stage and slapped Rock across the face. Smith also cursed at Rock and said he didn't want to hear the comedian say his wife's name ever again. Well, look, all of this happened live with millions of people watching on TV. If you didn't see it, have a look at this.
Uh-oh, Richard! Oh, wow! Wow! Will Smith...
Ooh, moments later, in the show, Will Smith won his first Oscar, the Best Actor award for a leading role for his performance in King Richard. During his acceptance speech, he apologised for his role in, let's call it, the incident, and ended by saying that he hopes the Academy welcomes him back.
I want to apologize to the Academy. I want to apologize to all my fellow nominees. Art imitates life. I look like the crazy father, just like they said. I look like crazy father, just like they said about Richard Williams. But love will make you do crazy things.
Chris Rock is not pressing charges, as we understand it. Look, my next guest sees some discrepancies with the backlash against Will Smith now, and how white men in Hollywood have been treated in the past. She wrote the Academy Awards has condoned violence for years, particularly violence against women, rewarding white men who've raped, sexually assaulted and domestically abused women. Now, some of y'all demanding Will Smith, the fifth black man to win an Oscar, to be stripped. Where was the energy before? All those comments were written by civil and women's rights activist Dr. Shola Moz Shogbamimu, and she's the author of This Is Why I Resist. Don't define my black identity. I'm delighted you join me now live from London. There will be people who read what you have written and are sort of rolling their eyes at it. You know that, don't you? Come on.
Absolutely. I think it is important for us to understand that we cannot, condone violence in any shape, form, or manner. I am personally sick and tired of seeing black women disrespected and verbally violated in public spaces with no accountability. But violence clearly is not the right response to that. What the reason why I wrote that tweet was because the backlash was taking a totally different turn. I mean, should Will Smith be held to account for his actions? Yes. And the backlash of people condemning his action there, that is right, because you can love Will Smith, congratulate him on his win, but also condemn his action. But where I see a huge discrepancy are those who are now shouting, making a whole lot of noise, strip him of his Oscars, and then of his Oscar, should I say, because it's just his first. And you have other people, like the Academy Awards, saying we don't condone violence. And the discrepancy is right there, because for years, and we know that it's more white people that have been awarded Oscars than black people, right? We had that whole Oscar so white thing a few years ago. And I had to say, hold up a second. We've had white people who have been awarded Oscars, who've been convicted and also alleged to commit serious crimes against women, whether it's rape, sexual assault, all kinds of sexual harassment against women, but they've been awarded. How come their Oscars have not been stripped? Where was this energy? And the moment you have, Will Smith is going to be the fifth black man, as I understand it, to win this Oscar in this category, and now people are screaming for his Oscar to be stripped. Look, if we're going to hold people to account, it has to be proportionate. It cannot be disproportionate, and it cannot be discriminatory.
And listen, what we should be talking about today is exactly what you've brought up. I mean, his performance in King Richard was absolutely remarkable. And he's won his first Oscar for it. And it's not like he hasn't been around for some time. This guy has apologised. Chris Rock says he's not pressing any charges. You've got a very good point. I mean, your narrative, I think, will be appreciated by many people who are watching this show around the world. Look, I think we've got to be clear about this. Will Smith and Chris Rock have a history which predates this Oscar slap.
That's right.
I mean, we all know that, right?
Yes, yes. And this is not the first time that Jada Pinkett Smith will be the butt of Chris Rock's jokes. And some of these have been very, very painful. And as I said earlier, this does not mean we condone violence in any form. I'm just saying that any response has to be proportionate. It cannot be discriminatory, because even under the law, violence is recognized in different degrees, and it is punished according to those degrees. You just don't use one blanket, and you don't, one blanket all kind of fits all description to punish people and not punish other people. So I'm saying it has to be proportionate. It cannot be discriminatory. And no, he should not be stripped of his Oscar, because doing that would be disproportionate and discriminatory.
Dr. Shola, always good to have you on. A pleasure. Thank you. Just aired on Connect World, running from the shelling in Kharkiv. Some displaced Ukrainians found a refuge by heading for the hills, quite literally. We're going to meet some of them up next. Thousands of people who fled the terror being unleashed in Ukraine are finding at least some semblance of peace in what is an unlikely place. My colleague Salma Abdulaziz went to meet some of them in a mountain sanctuary, and she brings us their story.
Nestled deep in the Carpathian Mountains, far from the bombs and bullets, lies the idyllic ski resort of Slavsko, with plenty of room for those fleeing violence to find solace in the slopes. Many hotels have opened their doors to displaced families, some at no cost or discounted rates. Guests Stacy and Ramir found refuge here after Russian forces invaded their hometown of Kharkiv.
During this time, we usually heard shells blowing up, lots of bombardment.
How did you feel when you arrived?
When you look at these mountains and into the news, it seems like not real.
And you're here, you're safe. It feels kind of guilty because in the beginning I left all my family there.
After a terrifying week, mom and daughter finally squeezed onto a train out of embattled Kyiv. But where to go? Then they remembered a special family trip.
Yes, we love this place because our summertime we provide here.
So you had good memories here?
Good memory. We have good memory. We had good memories in this place.
I feel safe here. But I hope that this will end soon and we'll go home. Because living at home is much better because it's my home.
This tiny mountain community of Slavsko has taken in 3,400 displaced people, nearly doubling their population. But they say it's not a burden. They want to share this sanctuary. Some have chosen less traditional accommodations. Osa found peace for her 2 children in this glamping pod. My daughter wakes up every morning, opens the curtains, wipes the dew from the windows, and looks out at the view, she tells me. Yes, she loves it here. It's calming. I feel lighter, and I start to believe everything is going to be okay. For these families, this feels like the safest place in a country where it seems everywhere is a front line. Salma Abdulaziz, CNN, Slavsko-Ukraine.
It's been a busy couple of hours, hasn't it, of news. Thank you for joining us wherever you are watching in the world. One World with Julia Chatterley tonight is up next. We'll see you tomorrow.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, I'm Julia Chatterley and welcome to One World. Russia is intensifying attacks across Ukraine ahead of new rounds of negotiations, with storage and logistics sites increasingly coming under fire. Meanwhile, in the capital of Kyiv, Ukraine's deputy defense minister says Russian troops are trying to block supply routes to the city, but local forces have fought back. Ukrainian officials also say they've reclaimed the suburb of Irpin near Kyiv and are trying to clear Russian soldiers from the area. But in the southeast, Russia continues to block access to the port of Mariupol. The mayor says the city is in the hands of the occupiers. And the Ukrainian military official believes Russia is trying to split the country in two, much like North and South Korea. Moscow insists it's not trying to overthrow Ukraine's government and has agreed to more talks in Turkey this week. Now, ahead of those talks, Ukraine's president said his country is prepared to adopt a neutral status, but he said its sovereignty must be recognized.
Our priorities in the negotiations are known. Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity are beyond doubt. Effective security guarantees for our state are mandatory. Our goal is obvious: peace and the restoration of normal life in our native state as soon as possible.
Now, Ukraine forces may have repelled the Russian military in some rural areas outside Kyiv, but the intense fighting has taken a heavy toll, as ITV's Rohit Kashru reports.
Shevchenko survived, but not much else did. A statue of the Ukrainian poet still stands after almost everything else was wiped out by a Russian airstrike. The library was hit. Residents take the books they might have once borrowed. The town hall was destroyed too, and the shop for kids, and the pharmacy, and even the off-license. Bishiv is a village 1 hour from Kyiv, and it tells two stories. The crater reveals the force of Russian might. But there's a story of failure too. More than a month into this war, life of sorts carries on. The Russian troops never arrived, although plans were laid to stop them getting in. It looks like an earthquake hit. There is complete destruction absolutely everywhere. But maybe the most interesting thing to see is not the fact this place was flattened, but the fact it wasn't flattened into submission. In the capital, monuments are being protected as history is rewritten. Because, met with a fierce resistance, Moscow now says it no longer wants to focus on the capital. But the Ukrainians don't believe that.
We cannot trust them. At the moment, we don't see any withdrawal of Russian troops from certain areas of Kyiv.
Because you needn't go far from Kyiv to see the area around it was in Russia's sights until not long ago. And the strategists protecting the capital believe nothing has changed. Rohit Kachru, ITV News, Bishiv.
Meanwhile, officials in Zaporizhia are doing everything possible to avoid an all-out Russian attack and keep residents safe. The city is in the southeastern Ukraine. It's now effectively under lockdown. Our Ivan Watson got access to the city and witnessed firsthand how police are enforcing a daytime curfew.
This is a checkpoint at the entrance to the eastern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia. But this is an unusual day. The government has imposed a citywide daytime curfew. Traffic is not being allowed in or out. And we're getting a look with the local police force at how they're enforcing this emergency curfew. I'm getting a tour of the city with two local police inspectors. We have passed many deployed Ukrainian soldiers. We cannot show them or film them for their safety, given that there is a full-fledged war taking place in this country. What is striking about this daytime curfew is that a city of nearly 1 million inhabitants is now a complete ghost town.
My name is Roman, Panchenko Roman. I'm Ukrainian. I serve in police for already 6 years. I like my work. I'm proud of my work.
In
the territory of the city, only policemen and some military men. Every car which goes to the city is checked.
The police say it's easier to maintain security and search for suspected Russian collaborators when the city is locked down.
How far away is the Russian army right now from where we are?
Russian army is several fronts, but the nearest place where Russian tanks are dislocated is maybe 30 kilometers from this place.
A half hour by car.
Yes, you're right.
Would you defend Zaporizhia if the Russian army comes here? I mean, you're not soldiers, you're police. Would you fight?
I'm a man. I am a Ukrainian man. As for me, it's very ashamed for a man not to protect his family, not to protect his house, not to protect his life.
The people here know what happened to other Ukrainian cities and towns that have been attacked by the Russian military. They don't want that to happen here, but they say if it does, they're ready.
And CNN's Ed Lavendera joins us now from Lviv in the west of Ukraine. Ed, good to have you with us. I want to talk about what's taking place around Kyiv and the Deputy Defence Minister's comments suggesting that Russian troops are effectively trying to create a corridor or a blockade around the capital city to prevent supplies getting in. And of course, the Ukrainian forces trying to repel them.
Right, and that seems to be the tactic that Russian forces have been employing over the last few days. So, as the Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister mentioned, trying to surround the city there of Kyiv, which is clearly the driving force of this country right now. But what is interesting, though, is that just a short while ago, the mayor of Irpin, that suburb of Kyiv, is saying that that city has now been liberated from Russian forces. The mayor says that it is not safe for residents to return back to that city right now because they continue attacking to begin. But all of this happening at the same time. So this idea that Ukrainian forces are trying to prevent Russian forces from surrounding that city to prevent the supply route to be choked off. But that does also, Julia, play into what we have seen over the last few days in other parts of the country. Here in the western part of Ukraine, Lviv, we saw an airstrike on a fuel depot, and this is a fuel source for many of the Ukrainian forces. Overnight, we saw multiple attacks in cities nearby here in the west that also attacked fuel depots. We understand that one of those missiles was fired from the country of Belarus, which is just on the northern border of Ukraine. So all of that speaks to Russia apparently seeming to target the much-needed fuel that the Ukrainian forces will need to continue battling the Russian forces. So that's kind of the strategy that we're seeing at this point. And this all happening on the eve of Russian and Ukrainian officials supposed to be coming together on Tuesday in Turkey to continue peace talks.
Yeah, it's so important, the separation of what the ground forces are achieving or not achieving relative to the aerial offence, which, to your point, is seemingly continuing to attack key infrastructure like fuel supplies, for example. I want to ask you about comments from the top military intelligence chief as well in Ukraine, saying Russia's trying to separate the south and the east, so building this land corridor, it seems, between Crimea in the south and the Donbass region, where we have separatist regions in the east of the country. What do you make of that in terms of perhaps a strategy, particularly heading into, as you mentioned, the negotiations over possible peace tomorrow?
Right, you know, that's the great question as to exactly really what is the intent here. Is this a legitimate plan? Is this a legitimate idea, or is this the Russian government trying to maybe save face a little bit, given how hard and how ferociously Ukrainian soldiers have pushed back against Russian forces on the ground? But originally it was believed that Russian forces were going to try to move in from eastern Ukraine along the northern edge of the Black Sea all the way down to Odessa, but they have not made it that far, and it's a real question as to whether or not they will be able to do that. So is this a question of that this is exactly what their intent is, or are they trying to change the standards by which they're trying to measure the invasion here in Ukraine by a positive one in their view? So I think all of that seems to be a question that's very much up in the air, and exactly what it is that they're up to is not clear totally here on the ground in Ukraine.
Ed, great to have you with us. Thank you. Ed Lavendera there. Now, the next round of face-to-face talks between Russia and Ukraine are set to be held in Istanbul on Tuesday, as Ed mentioned, and that's where we find CNN's Arwa Damon. Now, Arwa, coming into this, President Zelensky giving an interview to Russian media suggesting they would be perhaps willing to adopt a neutral status, though it would have to be put to the Ukrainian people in terms of a referendum. What's your sense? Does that bring us any closer in terms of some kind of compromise in these negotiations?
Well, for a lot of observers to these negotiations and who are looking forward to tomorrow, they will point to that to say that, look, this is both sides potentially coming to more of a middle ground. Because what does it mean for Ukraine to be a neutral state? That would mean that it would not be getting involved as any third party to a conflict, which would effectively mean that for now, at least, NATO membership would be off the table. Keeping in mind, of course, as Zelensky himself pointed out, this was one of Russia's main justifications for wanting to invade Ukraine, along, of course, with Russia's claim that it needed to denazify Ukraine. Now, when it comes to that sort of rhetoric, whether we're talking about denazification or demilitarization, that rhetoric that is being used by the Russians for the Ukrainians, that is an absolute red line. They do not want to hear any sort of that rhetoric moving forward. Another of the issues is, of course, the unity of Ukraine itself. Interestingly, Turkey, which has been playing a very active role in mediating between Russia and Ukraine itself, has also said that Ukraine's territorial integrity needs to be restored. This is something that, of course, is going to run contrary to what it is that the Russians want to see achieved. They annexed Crimea back in 2014. That not internationally recognized. They want it to be. You also have the issue of the Donbas region. What is going to be happening there? But we are also hearing some speculation that when it comes to Crimea and the Donbas region, this might be an issue that could perhaps, Julia, be tabled to a later date. When it comes, though, to these particular negotiations, aside from the fact that, the Ukrainian president did say, as you mentioned there, any sort of neutral state for Ukraine would need to be put to a referendum by the people, there's also the sense, and I have to say we've heard this from the Ukrainians and also from the Russians, that they want any sort of agreement to be more than ink on paper. But from a realistic perspective, can this much actually be achieved at this stage? We really don't know. A lot of what happens in these negotiations is dictated by the battlefield dynamics. And right now you do see the Ukrainians making some gains, the Russians continuing with airstrikes and other sorts of strikes throughout the entire country, which brings me to the issue of humanitarian corridors. Humanitarian corridors absolutely must be opened in greater number, and their safety and security absolutely needs to be guaranteed. And so the sense that one also gets going into these talks is that hopefully, at the very least, the parties will be able to accomplish that.
Yeah, we pray for that. Arwa Damon, some critical points there. Thank you. Now, coming up, around 1/3 of Ukraine's economy is incapacitated. It's simply not functioning. What money's coming in and where's it going? My talk with Ukraine's finance minister next. Welcome back to One World. Today, EU interior ministers have been meeting in Brussels to discuss the Ukrainian refugee crisis. 3.8 million people from Ukraine have now fled to neighbouring nations. That, according to the United Nations. Germany says it has received more than 300,000 people and is urging that the refugees be more evenly distributed between the 27-nation bloc. Meanwhile, more than 2 million people have crossed the border into Poland. CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson is in Brussels for us. Nick, Europe's no stranger to the conversation of addressing fairer distribution of refugees wherever they come from. But there's an additional challenge here, and that is, I'm sure many of these refugees don't want to move too far from the border because they've got loved ones that have remained back in Ukraine and they hope to go home soon.
Yeah, looking back to the influx of refugees that came from Syria in 2015, it was those nations that bordered or were closer to Syria that took most of the refugees. Greece, Turkey both had a huge burden of refugees. Germany took a lot in the end, opened the doors. That was Angela Merkel. Today it's Poland that has the bulk of refugees because Poland is closest to Ukraine. Romania also, Moldova, Bulgaria, Hungary as well, getting quite large numbers of refugees. So what is being looked at here at the European Union is a way to process refugees and bring them to other European Union nations. And as you rightly say, back in 2015 and even before, when the European Union was trying to get its hands around, if you will, to use that expression, the large numbers of Syrian refugees making it to Europe, they were very slow off the mark. They're much faster right now. What the European Union is trying to do is to find hubs and mechanisms of transportation that they can use, and routes of transportation that they can use for many months to come. And they're also looking at a way of trying to register refugees as they arrive. So a registration system that can work across the whole of the European Union. For example, just as in the same way that the COVID vaccination certificates, if you will, that were used across the European Union were able to be used in all the different countries and jurisdictions. So that's the aim with the refugees, to be able to move them, to be able to locate them, and to be able to register them as well. But there's another issue here, and we've just been getting a sense of that from the European Union's High Representative and Vice President Josep Borrell, their sort of head diplomat, if you will, speaking after his meetings in Doha over the past few days about perceptions outside the European Union that Russia's narrative is winning. And this, he says, coupled with the fact that Ukraine and Russia both produce vast amounts of wheat consumed extensively in Africa, food shortages there will lead to problems, social problems, food problems on the African continent, which in turn can potentially lead to migration to Europe and also blame of Europe for the crisis in Ukraine. So all of these issues, not just the immediate influx of refugees, but the secondary consequences of higher wheat prices in many developing nations. And that itself can then lead to refugees flowing again towards Europe. So this is a multi-layered problem, and the European Union just beginning to try to grapple with it, Julia.
Yeah, the ripple effect of this crisis is far bigger. We'll see what they come up with. Nick, great to have you with us. Thank you. Now, on top of the human suffering, as Nick was just describing there, caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the economic toll also mounting. While the war rages on, an estimated 30% of the country's economy is not functioning, while at the same time Ukraine continues to operate on a war footing, paying salaries and fulfilling other financial obligations. Earlier, I spoke with Ukraine's finance minister, Sergei Menchenko, and asked how his government is managing the day-to-day.
Yes, we have data which we use government support tool. We paid $200 US for every person who can't live in that territory, who lost his job. Our preliminary estimation is also a little bit around 3 million people who lost their job, and it could be people who have a position, occupied position in a business or have own business. And it's more than 3 million people now is refugee and lived in a European country temporary, and it's also great damage for our economy.
I mean, in the short term, as you've said, you're still meeting your commitments. You're trying to pay pensions. You have soldiers to pay. You're issuing what's called war bonds, but it's very expensive and it's short-term debt. And that means it needs to be paid back quickly. How long can you continue to do this, to operate like this?
You know, for us, the better scenario is to end the war as quickly as possible, because it's damaging our economy, it's war killing our people, civilians, etc. So for us, the most possible and good scenario is to end this war as fast as possible. However, we want to be able to save our country, to protect our people. That's why we calculated our current budget forecast for around 2 or 3 months period of time, and we have losses in our revenues. That's why the only way to fulfill this fiscal gap is to borrow. So our instrument, war bond, is one of the instruments. Another instrument is international financial organization and concessional financial from different countries. So you mentioned this in your comments. So we received several $3 billion US dollars already and negotiated around $6 billion US dollars. So and of course it's not enough. It's not enough. So now we are trying to create special vehicle for Ukraine, together with IMF, together with Ministry of Finance of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, and to allocate part of SDR, which was relocated for different countries in 2021, for Ukraine especially. So countries like Canada, United Kingdom, Germany is looking closely at this instrument.
Yeah, and at the same time as you're trying to pay wages and salaries and keep the economy together, I know you've said you're committed to making debt and interest payments in order to keep market access. Your economy ministry has estimated that the cost in its entirety to the economy could be more than $500 billion, $565 billion to be specific. Minister, is that correct? Could it be that big?
It's a way we are talking about what we are estimating. We're estimating the loss of possible GDP, because we expected this year GDP growth more than 3%. So it's a loss of GDP growth. So and also it's about a loss of infrastructure. So we should recover our infrastructure to and I think that the true figures would be clear only after the war, but preliminary estimation of our Ministry of Economy is true, because it's also based on different methodologies how to calculate these losses. So they use different ways on how to calculate it, so it could be very true figures.
Wow. I mean, just so my audience understands, your GDP in 2020, according to the World Bank, was $155 billion, just to put it into perspective of the loss we're talking about. Ukraine's top intelligence chief suggested that Russia's ambitions are to split the country, sort of the north and the south, that Russia will try and create a corridor between Crimea and the Donbass region. Minister, if we keep the politics out of it, and I know that's difficult, what would that mean to the economy? Can Ukraine accept that loss of the country? Surely it would mean too great a level of devastation for the economy, never mind other losses.
You know, we will not accept any losses, any meters of our countries. So we will fight against any possible scenario which moves us towards this. So our idea is to safeguard and protect all our countries in the borders before the 24th of February. So, and it's not possible even to mention that we can live without some part of our territory, because of it's It's about our economy, it's about our people, it's about our logistics. Now our harbor in Odessa region is blocked, so we need to find another way how to transfer commodities towards Europe and other countries. And that's why for us it's important to fight against aggressor till the end, till the last meter of our territory will be safe and independent.
Thanks to Sergei Marchenko there, Ukraine's finance minister. Okay, coming up on One World, an independent Russian newspaper that interviewed Ukraine's president halts publication following his second warning from Moscow's media watchdog. A live report straight ahead. Hello and welcome back to One World. I'm Julia Chatterley. An independent Russian newspaper has suspended publication until the brutal war in Ukraine comes to an end. It comes after Moscow's media watchdog issued a second warning to the paper following its interview with Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky. President Zelensky had earlier said that Russia is frightened by journalists who tell the truth, a claim the Kremlin denies. CNN's David McKenzie is following the story. So, David, let me get this straight. There's Kremlin saying they're not afraid of this interview, but they're banning it anyway. Sounds inconsistent to me.
Well, specifically, it's the regulator that is warning Novaya Gazeta, the storied independent newspaper in Russia, that has now taken this very heavy decision to stop its publications. Now, they weren't the only ones who were speaking to President Zelensky of Ukraine. There were several other media outlets. What remains in Russia, of course, are a much reduced independent press corps. They were also speaking to journalists, well-known journalists, who are now in exile. And it speaks to the continued attempts by the Kremlin, by the Russian government, to try and squeeze independent publications, a true picture of the war. Of course, a reminder, you can't even call it an invasion in Russia, and you could face up to a 15-year prison sentence because of that. The Kremlin spokesperson telling CNN that they are not afraid of Zelensky, but as you say, this just proves yet again that the real picture of the war is something that is not getting out in Russia, and the information war is arguably one that the Russians are able to control, at least within their borders.
Within this information war, and I couldn't agree more with you, the messaging on all sides is important, and the framing of the context of Russia's ambitions also important. My understanding was from the Western intelligence chiefs that the ambition from Russia was to remove President Zelensky of Ukraine. What's the Kremlin saying about that specific point at this moment?
They've been hinting at it for some time, this kind of dialing back of the ambitions, at least, though, as you say, in the early hours and days of the conflict, you had several Western intelligence officials telling CNN that the ultimate aim was to decapitate the leadership in Kyiv and to put in a puppet regime. Now, you've seen over the last several weeks, more than a month, that the ambitions of the Russian military hasn't gotten to that point. There's still a struggle over the capital, and following on from Friday's announcement by the military that they are going to focus on the eastern part of Ukraine as their main objective, you had that again from the security chief of the Kremlin today, more explicitly even, saying that their aim is not to, in fact, have any kind of regime change. Now, that might have been their aim all along, but this misinformation continues to be a key facet of this. In that same statement, he also claimed that they are not targeting civilian areas, something that time and time again in our reports and in independent observation has shown to be not true. So it's difficult to take what they are saying from the Russian side at face value, but it does suggest a shift, at least in the framing of this. And it's also important to note that the audience for these kind of statements isn't necessarily outside of Russia, but very much for the Russian public and state media to try and make this conflict more palatable and to often hide the truth. Julia?
David Mackenzie, thank you for that. Now, this week, Ukraine is engaging with Russia's diplomats at the negotiating table while fiercely engaging its troops on the battlefield. Ukrainian forces have been putting up a tough fight against their invaders in places like Kyiv and the surrounding suburbs. But Russian soldiers are still trying to bombard other cities into submission. This includes Mariupol, where the destruction has been widespread.
I've lived here since my birth, my husband as well. We got married here and had babies. What now? What is left for us? I don't want to go anywhere from Mariupol, but there's nowhere to live here.
You know, we got lucky. We've advised people what to do. Those inexperienced ran to the basement. I was running in my apartment. My windows there were broken with bullets and shell fragments. I ran there and back depending on where they were shooting. It was a big mess. But we survived, you see. Survived. Thank God, alive. Also, for my daughter, your dad is alive.
Let's discuss all of this with former Ukrainian Defense Minister Andrei Zagorodnyuk. Andrei, great to have you with us. You were part of the process of preparing Ukraine for attacks like this. How does it feel looking at images of the country that you see, Mariupol, beyond?
Well, Ukrainians are mentally very similar to Western people. So how would it feel to any person in a democratic country to see that their towns are being destroyed just because we don't want to be somebody's colony? So it's beyond explanation, beyond words. I mean, it's brutal and it's absolutely not human. So it's definitely all war crimes, red lines crossed. all possible damages, like I don't even know how much. I mean, but the human suffering is immeasurable. So honestly, this is something which we've been preparing for a military conflict for all this time, because we knew that strategic goals of Russia was always around to somehow to damage our independence and our sovereignty. But honestly, not many people thought that he would go that far. But of course, we knew that he can go far, because there's no moral code of conduct, seems like, for Putin. What he did in Syria, what he was doing in other countries, and so on. But to do this with the Russian-speaking cities in the east of Ukraine, where people weren't so much, antagonistic to Russia like culture, legacy, and so on, this is unbelievable.
The Russian Security Council Secretary, to your point, said that Russia's goal is not to overthrow the Ukrainian government. Do you believe him, or do you believe that to be a lie?
No, of course it's a lie. It's been lying all through. But the thing is this: they cannot achieve any of their objective goals so far. Any of their military objectives so far. They're just failing with the Kyiv operation. They're failing with other operations and so on. So now they decided that at least to achieve something, and they are going to concentrate their forces on the east, where they had some progress, and they would try to show this, because they desperately need to show to themselves, to Putin, to all other audience in Russia, that they can achieve something. That's going to be very difficult for them, because Ukrainian forces are quite strong there, very strong actually. So this is like a plan D for Russia, because the first two plans, like ABC, they didn't work. So now they try another one.
Let's talk about that then. If we are talking about the Russians trying to form a land corridor between Crimea and the Donbass region, which of course would encompass critical ports and sea access for Ukraine as well. Yeah. What are the capabilities for Ukraine to, in terms of forces, in terms of finances, to defend against that?
Well, it's similar as in all other areas. Basically, what Russia did, they started the campaign from many different angles, many different sides, in order to stretch Ukrainian armed forces and essentially damage it through like a series of like multi-directional attacks from different angles. That didn't work, because we could still strong, and we were winning that ground fight. Also, they couldn't suppress our air defense and so on. But then they changed the objectives several times, and now they're trying to concentrate on one area. In this case, we obviously would pull our forces to that area, and holding that, even if they take some territory, holding it would be virtually impossible. Holding with a successful sort of like regime change and so on and so on. And they see this all over the country, where they try to keep the towns and cities, towns and villages which they occupy. So Ukrainian armed forces are very determined to not make that a success to Russia, and so far we're succeeding, of course.
Invading a country is one thing, holding it, to your point, is entirely separate. The current Deputy Defense Minister has suggested that Russian troops are trying to build a corridor, a blockade around Kyiv to withdraw or reduce supply capabilities into the city. How important is it to Ukraine's survival, particularly given it's the heart of government too, to prevent that happening?
It's very important. Kyiv is, of course, it's a heart. More than half of people left by now, but still there's like government there. There are like massive territorial defense, massive troops there. So that would be difficult. But I can tell you the other thing. I'm from Kyiv myself, and I lived in Kyiv all my life. And Kyiv is very difficult to encircle. It's topography, it's geography, it's the way it's built, the rivers, the areas, marshlands, we have also, and so on. So it's very tough to successfully encircle Kyiv. And they tried to do this before and they failed. So until they do this, they will have lots of disappointments. And it's not that an easy task. And even if they encircle it, it would be very difficult to hold that encirclement together. So, so that objective is extremely hard to reach.
Do you think that perhaps is the way this ends, Andrei? If Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian people can stand strong, they can wait Russia out?
Yes, and that's the only option we have. We don't have any plan B. We don't have plan C or anything. We need to stand until we win, because because first of all, we see that we are able to win because we've been damaging their plans for the whole month, and they have lost incredible amount of people and equipment. But also we don't have any other choice because he tries to destroy our country, he tries to destroy our cities and so on. So that's the only way for us. And yes, we believe in our success. We're succeeding so far, and with the help of our allies, with equipment, I'm sure we can win.
Yeah, to your point, sir, there is no plan B. Great to have you with us. Thank you for your time and stay safe, please. Former Ukrainian Defense Minister there, Andrei Zagorodnyuk. If you would like to help people in Ukraine who may be in need of shelter, in need of food and water, please go to cnn.com/impact. You'll find several ways that you can help. For now, we're going to take a break, but coming up here on One World, Shanghai emerging as the new epicenter of China's worst COVID outbreak in 2 years. Why the city's shutting down one half at a time. Next. Welcome back to One World and to Israel now, where officials say ISIS is behind an attack that killed 2 people and injured 6 others in the city of Hadera, not far from Tel Aviv. Israeli police shot and killed the 2 gunmen. It's the second fatal attack in Israel connected to ISIS in the past week, and it coincided with a landmark summit hosted by Israel. Top diplomats from Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt and the US have been meeting to discuss security issues. A huge swathe of Shanghai now under lockdown, the city emerging as the epicenter of China's worst outbreak in 2 years. 11 million people in the eastern half of the city told to stay at home for 4 days of mass testing. The western half, with 14 million people, is to follow on Friday, as Stephen Zhang reports.
This lockdown order came after days of confusion and chaos on the streets, but also online about what the authorities would do to Shanghai, which is experiencing its biggest surge of COVID cases since the pandemic began. Now, for days, officials had denied there would be a citywide lockdown, with police even launching investigations against so-called rumor mongers about the city's imminent closure. When you look at the number, more than 16,000 cases since March, a huge deal for China, and with even a suspicion about this number being underreported. But when you dive a bit deeper, the overwhelming majority of these cases have been asymptomatic, which according to most experts would not require much hospital care. So for a long time, up to this latest wave of cases, Shanghai had prided itself on its less disruptive approach to COVID containment. The city had never undergone citywide mass testings, and its quarantine measures were often considered less restrictive compared to the rest of the country. So there was actually a lot of hope this Shanghai model would be adopted by the rest of the country, more lenient, more targeted approach, and eventually leading to the country to be reopened to the rest of the world. But instead, we are seeing now Shanghai authorities adopting some of the very harsh measures we had previously only seen in other cities, really confining millions of residents to their homes, shutting down a large portion of the city's public transportation, including the world's biggest metro system, and of course, a lot of concerns and even agony about the increasingly strained healthcare system, with a lot of people seeking medical attention for non-COVID related causes being turned away, leading to at least one death of a local nurse because of this. And then, of course, there were a lot of concerns about the city's elderly population, because Shanghai does have the oldest population among all major Chinese cities, and that's the segment of the population that has been under-vaccinated. All of this really leading to a lot of panic buying at stores, at takeout restaurants, and also a growing sense of fatigue, frustration, or even anger really bursting online. But even though all of this is taking place in Shanghai, the decision, of course, is being made here in Beijing. And at least for now, the leadership is showing no sign of trying to change course to their zero COVID policy, because it's been working for them politically. Not to mention their top priority right now is this Communist Party National Congress to be held later this year. It seems, at least for now, they're not going to tolerate this scenario of COVID cases raging across China, as President Xi Jinping is expected to take his third term in office later this year. Stephen Jiang, CNN, Beijing.
Now coming up on One World, the slap seen around the world. How Hollywood's biggest night of the year left one star seeing stars. That's next. Comedian Chris Rock has decided not to press charges after he was slapped during Sunday night's Oscar ceremony by actor Will Smith. The stunning moment came after Rock made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's hair loss. Have a listen.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Richard. Oh, wow. Wow.
Smith continued to curse at Rock, saying he did not want the comedian to speak his wife's name. Shortly after, Smith won his first Best Actor Oscar for his portrayal of the fiery father of tennis stars Venus and Serena Williams. CNN's Stephanie Elam was at the Oscars Sunday night, and she joins us now from Los Angeles. Stephanie, great to have you with us. It was a slap, I think, that reverberated around the world and has certainly split opinions, I think. We're several hours on, but I do want to just hear from you what it was like to be in the room and how the audience also felt and handled it.
Yeah, Julia, everyone pretty much at first thought it was a bit. I mean, you have a funny man and a comedian, right? So everyone's going to assume that's what it was. But I can tell you, I was sitting nowhere near the stage, and I heard the slap. I actually heard it. And then I could hear what Will was saying from his chair, and he had no mics around him. So that shows you how loud he was yelling. So all of this had everyone confused, and then everyone realized it was a real moment, and it got very quiet, and then everyone started talking about it. And I almost feel sorry for the people who won awards after that, because so much inside the theater was being taken up by what we all saw play out on stage. And if you think about it too, Julia, like the way that Chris Rock responded, he held his composure, and he was thrown off balance, but he stood back up and then made jokes and continued to give the award for Best Documentary. So it could have escalated further, but it did not. But it was shocking on a night that everyone knew that he was going to win Best Actor and that he would do this just before, less than an hour later, he won his first Academy Award.
Yeah, it's shocking on so many levels. I think my overriding takeaway was her face. And now we know more about the medical condition and the history of these three superstars as well. But her face, I think, was important to look at. No one's condoning violence. But I think the important point here is that it overshadowed amazing talent on the night, including Will Smith in King Richard in particular, but also Ukraine and the opportunity to highlight the plight of Ukrainians, because that was also, I think, handled very well too.
Yes, and we knew that there was going to be some tribute. We had been told that, but we didn't know how it was going to play out during the show. We also knew that Mila Kunis had been invited to be a presenter. She was born in Ukraine, and there was a song which Reba McEntire sang. It was written by Diane Warren, that was up for an Oscar, and that movie, 4 Good Days, is what it's from, but Mila Kunis is the star of that. So we knew she was going to come out and talk, and when she did, she referenced what was going on in the world. Take a listen to what she had to say.
Recent global events have left many of us feeling gutted. Yet when you witness the strength and dignity of those facing such devastation, it's impossible to not be moved by their resilience. One cannot help but be in awe of those who find strength to keep fighting through unimaginable darkness.
And the songs were all beautiful, but I think some people thought we would hear more from Mila in that moment. But then afterwards, they did have words on screen that talked about how you could support the refugees from Ukraine. Some people on the carpet also had blue ribbons that show that they were supporting the refugees and all that is going on in Ukraine. So there was that uniting moment. Overall, the show did feel like that. But I do, there are some people who had great wins, historical wins like Troy Kotsur winning the first deaf male actor and the first one to win since his co-star, who won in the 80s, Marlee Matlin. So you had moments like that, Ariana DeBose for West Side Story. You just had great moments. Coda winning Best Picture overall. Those were great moments. But I think a lot of that may have been overshadowed by what happened with Will and Chris.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's what we're talking about, and we should be talking about many other things. Irrespective of your opinion of what happened, it's a shame that many other things were overshadowed. Yes. What can I say? Stephanie, great to have you with us. Thank you. One to remember, for better or worse. Now, and of course, as Stephanie was saying there were also awards handed out at the Oscars last night. Coda, a film that featured many deaf actors, won Best Picture. Coda was distributed by Apple TV and becomes the first Best Picture winner from a streaming service. Jessica Chastain, too, won Best Actress for her work in The Eyes of Tammy Faye. And Jane Campion took Best Director for The Power of the Dog. She's just the third woman to ever win an Oscar for directing, and I've met her, and she's an incredible talent and a really humble woman. So I'm happy about that one. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching. I'm Julia Chatterley. Our coverage continues next with Anna Cabrera and Don Lemon.
Hello everyone and welcome to Amanpour, live from the Ukrainian capital. Here's what's coming up.
Reporting from Kyiv, is Putin's war on Ukraine entering a new phase after a month of setbacks? Tonight we'll ask a top aide to President Zelensky, Igor Zhovkva. And Ilya Ponomarev joins me. He once served in the Russian parliament but opposed Putin's invasions. Now he's here fighting against him for Ukraine. Plus,
if Russia sees this, I want them to know that they aren't defending us. They are killing us.
Escape from hell. Ukrainian families forced to flee the besieged city of Mariupol share their stories of loss and survival. Also ahead,